Hello, I'm Henry, and I read a book. I read this book, Child of God by Cormac McCarthy, and I would like to talk about it, please. The last time we covered good old Robert McCormack on this channel, I started the video with a tired analogy. A story is like a boat in a river. The boat is the main character or something, and the flow of the water is the plot. The purpose of using that analogy back then was to highlight the importance of punctuation. I called the keel of the boat the punctuation because it keeps everything stable. But in this video, I want to rewind a little and talk about that flow of water, the plot, because I'm not sure the one-to-one in that analogy is right, or at least not right all the time. In an ideal world, you don't want your plot pushing your character along like a boat on a current. You want your character to be propelling the plot, making decisions and taking actions that affect things and push everything forward. I'm not sure how you would transpose that into the boat on a river metaphor, but whatever. The point is, the metaphor of the boat on the water doesn't work all the time. It does work for stories with less than ideal passive characters where the water is the engine, and it doesn't quite work for more proactive characters where the water isn't the engine. But what if there was no water at all? What if there was no motion? You could have the fastest boat in the world with the most powerful motor ever made, but with no water, you're just sitting in the riverbed going nowhere. You could have a massive hydroelectric dam capable of altering the flow of whole rivers, but with no water, it's just a big pointless wall. For a river to be a river, it needs water. But for a story to be a story, does it need a plot? Apparently, Cormac McCarthy decided to ask that question with this book, and we shall answer it here. No, a story doesn't need a plot. Slice of life is a genre in itself, the whole premise being there is no overarching plot. It's just a bunch of characters going about their day. It's relaxed, it's calm, it doesn't ask that much of you as the audience. The genre does tend to come in the form of a series, though that isn't always the case, where things are more episodic. Each episode might have some light plot, but that's normally wrapped up by the end of that episode. And there's nothing really connecting each episode to each other. There's nothing really pushing the whole series forward. And it works. Slice of life is a hugely popular genre. As are sitcoms. Seinfeld is famously described as a show about nothing, just a bunch of people hanging out. And yet, along with Friends, another show with no real overarching plot, it was a phenomenon. So for a story to be a story, it doesn't need a plot if it's chilled and light and fun. Child of God is not chilled, light, and fun. Child of God is not the kind of story that can be about nothing. And yet it is. It is the episodic slice of life adventures of a grubby man murdering his way through the Tennessee hills. It is a harrowing horror novel about nothing but violence and depravity with no real point, cohesion, or greater meaning. And personally, I feel like if you're going to make something about violence and depravity, especially violence and depravity to this level, you kind of need a point or cohesion or greater meaning. Otherwise, you're just making something for shock value, like The Terrifier or something. But there's no real shock value here either. The violence and depravity shown is presented in a sort of muted, matter-of-fact way, or not even shown at all and just hinted at. So I genuinely don't know the point of this. As you can probably tell from my tone, I did not like this book, which I did not expect going in. I really like No Country for Old Men, the last Cormac McCarthy book we covered. That was most likely down to that book actually having a plot and having things going on. But let's put that aside for a moment. We'll get back to all the plot stuff in a bit. If you don't know, Cormac McCarthy has a pretty distinct writing style. He uses minimal punctuation, though more than he would admit, as we discovered, not really touching speech marks and the like. And it results in a smooth, streamlined, stripped back experience. It's stark, it's dry. But where I felt it really complemented No Country for Old Men, it really hurts Child of God. I don't think I've ever read a book this choppy before. It is so stop-start, it is like a stalling car. I think it has something to do with the chapters being so short. But I'd counter that with The Sisters Brothers by Patrick DeWitt. This is my favourite book ever, and it has short chapters too, but it doesn't feel like a stalling car. It's great, probably because it's got an actual plot holding things together. No, I said we'd get back to that. So I'd say the short chapters are mainly only partially to blame for this book feeling so fragmented and disjointed. Something else to blame? Cormac McCarthy arbitrarily switching between tense. He will start a chapter in third person present and then just snap back to third person past in the middle of a paragraph. I'm sure there are some literary reviewers who will say this is a stylish and aesthetic choice, but it kind of reads like Cormac McCarthy just giving up and regressing to the norm. If the whole thing was in this weird, awkward present tense, then I might agree with those hypothetical snobs, but it isn't. And when people speak, we get even more choppiness. I understand that the book is set in the deep south in like the 60s or something, and I'm here in London in 2024, so I've not really been exposed to people who talk like this ever. But even still, the short, sharp and deadpan here crosses over from the comical, which it can be at times, and borders on the disassociative. So when you combine these three things, the sheer chapters, the random tense changes, the stilted dialogue, with the lack of any grammatical framework, i.e. barely any punctuation holding it all together, the whole thing is really hard to digest. The review on the front of this book is funny to me because I don't think it could be any more wrong. His prose, unfailingly beautiful and exact, carries us into a dream world of astonishing and violent revelation. Tobias Wolff. Alright, Toby. 1. His prose is as far from exact as I think it could possibly be. As I said, the dialogue is unnatural as no one's business, and the tense jumps around with no rhyme or reason. 2. It is a dream world, but not in a positive way. Reading this is like waking up and trying to remember a dream you were having and just getting a headache. And 3. Revelation. How can there be any revelations if it's not got a point? If it's not saying anything? If it's not got a plot. Okay, let's swing back to the plot thing. In my video of The Last Don, I read its blurb, and I think I called the short I made of that bit the most misleading blurb of all time. This book's blurb is not quite as bad, but it's not great. Child of God is a taut, chilling novel that plumbs the depths of human degradation. Lester Ballard, a violent, solitary and introverted young backwoodsman dispossessed on his ancestral land, is released from jail and allowed to haunt the hill country of East Tennessee, preying on the population with his strange lusts. And while that may sound like any other blurb, what it is actually doing is scrambling around desperately trying to find something to tell you about. It is clutching at straws looking for a plot that isn't there. Because while this isn't a misleading blurb, it is a pretty disingenuous one. The way this is described, you'd be forgiven for thinking it's something like Cape Fear. Guy goes to prison, comes out a social pariah and looks to take revenge on the society that put him there. Except that's not what this is. This is not Cape Fear. Our protagonist, Lester Ballard, does go to prison for a crime he doesn't commit, no less. And when he gets out, he does go on quite the rampage. But the context is completely different. He's in prison for like a week. It's perfectly fine in there. And when he gets out, no one treats him any differently to how they were treating him before. It was so uneventful that I was thinking, that's not it, right? There's got to be another prison bit, surely. No. The fact that this blurb hinges itself around this prison spell that isn't really actually anything shows what little substance there is. It could easily name any of the other episodic things that Lester does as its crux. Lester Ballard sells some watches and is allowed to haunt the hill country of East Tennessee. Lester Ballard crosses a river and is allowed to haunt the hill country of East Tennessee. Lester Ballard's house burns down and is allowed to haunt the hill country of East Tennessee. Do you see what I mean? Toward the end, we do get some forward momentum, though only some. Lester tries to kill this guy and ends up getting his arm blown off. He winds up in a hospital where his crimes catch up with him. A vigilante group has finally had enough of him murdering his way across the countryside. He tricks them into getting stuck in some caves, gets stuck himself, gets free, hands himself back in, and ends up in another hospital where he eventually dies. But this is all right at the end. And before that, it's been pages and pages of disconnected stuff about a town getting flooded, and old gang wars, and shopping. It's really quite strange. That strangeness doesn't make it interesting though. It isn't fascinating, it's just thin. But if it's so thin on plot, is it thick with theme? meh. If you look up discussion about this book, you will find a lot of people waxing poetic about how it explores the depths of violence, isolation, and the degradation of the human soul. How it ponders themes of depravity and cruelty and their relationship with the society that creates them. But I would argue it doesn't. It doesn't explore or ponder these depths and these themes. It sort of just shows them to you. Yes, there are some horrifying things here, and just seeing them does make you think about them, but the book's not asking anything of you as the reader. It's not asking you to take away the imagery and the acts to ruminate on. It's not like parallels are being drawn between this crazy man's episodic spiral into evil and our modern world. It's not asking you if a certain human is capable of these things. What does that say about other humans? Are other humans capable of these things? It's not asking you anything like that. It's basically just going, hey, you want to see a scruffy man become Gollum? And that's not enough. Especially because I don't think the whole thing is a metaphor or some kind of weird extended analogy. I think I said this earlier, but if you're going to show such horrible things, you kind of need a point. You need to be saying something more, and you need to be going somewhere. Okay, allow me to read you the second half of the blurb, and while I called the first half disingenuous, not misleading, a part of this half fully is misleading. McCarthy transforms commonplace brushes with humanity in homesteads, stores, and in the woods into stunning scenes of the comic and the grotesque, and as the story hurtles towards its unforgettable conclusion, depicts the most sordid aspects of life with dignity, humour, and characteristic lyrical brilliance. I think I've made it quite clear that I don't think it is this at all. There are bits that are funny in a dry way, and there are times where Cormac McCarthy's writing style does work with what he's trying to do here, but the story hurtling towards its unforgettable conclusion. I have never been more offended by the word hurtling in my life. There is nothing hurtling about this book. It is about as far from hurtling as you can get. That unforgettable conclusion is the main character slowly dying from pneumonia, alone and old in a hospital bed. And there is no story. This book is not this blurb. It is a slice of life anime set in a Tennessee mountain cave, where the main character plods from murder to murder, themeless and plotless. So to answer the question again, no, a story doesn't need a story. But this one did. Hello, thanks a lot for getting to the end of the video. Like and subscribe. Apologies if the lighting is a bit weird here. I couldn't use the natural light like usual because I had to wait for Storm Burt to shut up. Next week, fanfic bingo in Yu-Gi-Oh! R number 2. See you there.